Hello and welcome to the February edition of Pen Writers Presents. I'm Joy Gibbons, joined here tonight by my co-host Rhonda Battenfelder, as always, and our special guests for this special Valentine episode, romance writers Abigail Drake and Stephanie Keys. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to get to know Abigail and Stephanie very well over this episode, but they've released some beautiful and wonderful romance novels in addition to writing several young adult and fantasy novels. They are really just incredibly talented ladies that we have in Pen Writers. So thank you for being here. So let's get started.
Thank you for having us. We're happy to be here. We always like to hang out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is it's like a little reunion. It's very exciting. And talking to adults that's the thing these days. You're really my social highlight of the week, I'm sad to say.
We can have a little chat as a treat. All right, well, let's start by getting a little more background and introduction to both of you for our pen writers and viewers who don't know you as well. Can you each tell us a little bit about your writing journeys so far, your experiences in publishing, and just about your work?
Stephanie, why don't you start?
Sure, I can go ahead and do that, no problem. Let me think. So writing journey so far and experiences in publishing. I mean, my journey started out really with grief. And what I mean by that is my dad was very sick. He had cancer. He ended up really struggling with cancer for about 7 years. And we always joked, and this is probably a terrible thing to joke about, but he reminded me a lot of the scene in Monty Python, where the man is going, "I'm not quite dead yet. I think I'm getting better. I could go for a walk." And we would joke with him about it because he would get really bad and then it would get really good. And he made a recovery. Now he's not made a recovery. So it was a yo-yo of things. And also, as relationships often are with their parents, a complicated relationship. And I needed something to do with that stuff. And so I thought, I'm going to write a story. And just ended up going to the place where I always go for my stories, which is the shower. And I take a shower, not give any more details there. But when I came out, I had this idea for a story about a girl who lit the stars in the sky at night. And so that was for my first book, was young adult book, The Star Child. And so I came out and I said to my husband, do you think it would be a good idea for me to write this story, or do you think this is crazy? And he's like, yeah, everything you do is crazy. Just go for it. And so I sat down and started writing this book with no plan, no idea. I had tried to write books before and didn't connect with the characters, and discovered through this process that the one thing that really resonated with me was writing from a male point of view, because apparently teenage boys are my soulmates. So I was able to connect with that character. So I was able to connect with that character in a way that I never could writing, women or girls at the time. And, since I've kind of branched out, had female protagonists, but at that time, I just really went right into it and started writing. And so that journey came with many years of rehashing and editing that book, and just kind of working on it over and over and over. In terms of the romance piece, I didn't dig into romance until years later, in terms of just deciding I wanted to move out of the new young adult realm and try something new. So I didn't really dig into romance until years later, when I decided to try it. And I had always been surrounded by romance for years. I had grown up in a high school that had a very poor library, and so there were only Harlequin romances in the teen section. And so I was reading things like Ginger and the Cowboy, and and Emily and the London Boss and stuff like that. I don't know if these are real names. So if someone's out there and you wrote that, I'm not being rude in any way. They were lovely. I just can't remember the titles that I read at that time. But what they did was they exposed me to other worlds and other settings. And I was really drawn to those just because they were really easy to kind of follow. There was very limited conflict. You know, the romance always has a happy ever after. And so, you know, after I had gone through the adult or young adult stage of writing, I thought, wow, it's really great writing some of these fantasy pieces, but there's always so much scary stuff in there. And wouldn't it be nice to just write a story where someone meets and falls in love and there's a happy ever after? So it wasn't until I would say, like, I started the Star Child, I started writing in 2008. And then in 2017, I decided to pick up Pippa and write my first romance. So it was a kind of a weird journey. I started off not really intending to write, not really knowing what I was doing. And then, you know, somewhere in between, of course, I'm admitting that I researched furiously, took millions of craft classes, bothered everybody with a million questions, asked everyone to be my writing friend, and just absorbed myself into that world. But I kind of started out just in one place, not knowing where I was going to end up. And the funny thing is, I ended up coming back to writing a lot of these romances that I loved so much as a kid. So it's neat to kind of make that journey full circle.
Awesome.
My journey was similar in many ways. I started out writing YA, but that was after a long time of people saying, you should write, and me saying, no, that's too hard. I can't do that. And I had a career. I had an import-export. I taught ESL. I lived in a bunch of different places. And I actually studied Japanese in college, which is so useful in Beaver, Pennsylvania. I'm so glad I spent all that time learning Japanese. But I started out writing YA, and I had an agent, and I was giving her some other things that I'd worked on, and she said, you know, everything you write has romantic elements in it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess so. She said, I think you're actually a romance writer. And I was like, well, yeah, I think I am. But that was always what I wanted to read, like Stephanie. There was a library in our town, and every Saturday morning I went there. And the children's section was where I was supposed to hang out at that point, but there was a little alcove next to the children's section that had all the Barbara Cartlands and the Harlequin romances. And so I would kind of like just stick my arm over and grab one and start reading it. And then pretty soon the librarian's like, just go ahead, take whatever you want. But started reading all those books, and I just like the escape of it and the guarantee that you're going to get a happily ever after. And then I kind of switched and started writing more rom-com and women's fiction kind of stuff. So I think it's often people say you should look very carefully at what you're reading to see what you should be writing. And I read a little bit of everything, but the books that I really go back to over and over again, the genre that I go back to over and over again is always romance.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I love how I already have some quotes written down from both of you for my little inspiration wall. So thank you so much. What do you both consider to be essential elements of romance writing?
Well, I think the first thing, as Stephanie mentioned, is there has to be a happily ever after, or an HFN, which is happy for now, which means
I hate those though. I hate those. I want a guarantee. I'm needy.
still qualifies. And it's kind of like they're moving closer together, but usually that's a series when you have a happy for now. It's something that they're trying to elongate the romance, not have everything solved. And the central part of the story has to be the love story. If you can take out the romantic elements from the book, the romance story, and if you still have a book there, if you still have a story there, then chances are it's not a romance. If if your book can't exist without that, then it's a romance. Because sometimes people get a little confused between women's fiction and contemporary romance. And I think that's often there's an overlap of those two genres, but I think that that's the way you can have clarity. If the book has romance in it, but the main focus is the woman's journey, then it's women's fiction. But if the main focus is the love story, then it's a romance, if that makes sense. And there's something else too. Well, there are some minor things. Not those are the two big ones: the happily ever after and the central love story. But you have to write a heroine who's relatable. If your reader doesn't feel a connection to the heroine, I think romance is a super personal experience because you're putting yourself in that other person's skin in a very vulnerable way. Because when you're reading the book, you're experiencing her feelings for this other person, and so obviously you have to be able to relate to her, but also you have to be able to fall in love with the guy. It has to be your type. And their relationship has to be believable. Like if it's just too, it can be total opposites and really interesting, but you have to see why these two would end up together. And I think that's important. What do you think, Steph?
I agree. I mean, I am going to piggyback there on what you just said. It's got to be believable. And let's think about what's believable for a moment. What's not believable? What's not believable is two perfect, happy, shiny people show up and they see each other and they fall in love and they have no problems, no conflicts. They have a great, hot, steamy time, sexy time, and then it's over, right?
Happy fun time.
Yeah. And then it's over. And let's face it, that's a load of bull because people are broken. Every single person has a crack in them. There's something wrong with all of us. We spend an inordinate amount of time trying to hide those things from one another. And especially when we're new to relationships, pretending they don't exist. But they come into our relationships and our personal lives as much as they should in a novel. And you should still have internal and external conflict, even if you're writing a romance. In fact, more so, because to Wendy's point, it's all about vulnerabilities. And a lot of times, there are stories out there where there isn't any conflict. The characters aren't really developing themselves. But let's face it, we got to get over our own issues before we can move past them and go into a relationship. Because it has the expression go, if you can't love somebody else, if you can't love yourself. And that applies in romance because you really need to make that believable. You've got to sell it. And people have to go through a lot sometimes to get into a relationship. I mean, I don't even know why my husband married me. I put him through a lot when we were dating. So I mean, I keep that in mind. And then also, I mean, like, you've got to feel what you're writing too. I mean, like when you're writing a romance, and I don't know if it's like this for you, Abigail, but like when you're writing a romance, for me, I need to be in that moment. I need to be when I'm sitting there writing about a character saying, I love you. I'm going to do anything for you. Like you're my person and I waited my whole life for you. I need to believe that myself. I need to almost be in that person's shoes, which I have been sitting there like typing and sobbing. I love you so much. You know, this person isn't real. Obviously, this is a fictional character that I've fallen in love with. There are a couple I still have crushes on, but like you have to be able to put yourself in that mindset that, hey, this is a real relationship and you need to be as invested as the reader hopefully will be.
And this is one reason as well that I think it's really important to promote diverse voices in romance, because I think that when you're reading a character who might look different from you or be from a different culture or something like that, when you're reading a romance, you're putting yourself so much more into that person's shoes, I think, and perhaps just in a different way. But I think it's a really good way to promote more understanding, because and also less discrimination, because if we can get into that person's skin and see the world through their eyes in this very basic thing, which is falling in love, then it changes how we perceive people in other ways, I think. Or maybe I only had 2 sips of wine so far. So I don't know.
Well, maybe you should have more. You never know. I personally, I'm more insightful now. I have just finished work, so I have a Pepsi like that, and that's just because I don't want to run out of steam. But no, I agree. I mean, it's, people need to not just see one viewpoint, not just see one lens. And I was telling Abigail that I was reading the South Side Stories, and so I think of Sally, who's a transgender character who I absolutely adore.
I'm glad.
And the treatment was so fantastic, I felt, as a reader, because I don't know that I have come across, again, like when you're reading a lot of romance, a lot of times those characters are the same kinds of characters that you're seeing. And so it's nice to see people who aren't fitting into a cookie cutter mold, that they're being themselves, they're being who they want to be, because that's what we as readers need to be reading. We don't need to be told we have to fit into a mold. We don't need to be told that, we need to be a size 8 and perfect and blonde and whatever. We just need to be who we want to be.
Oh, I agree.
Excellent points on both counts. And I think your point to the need for diversity, both in characters and in writers, is well made. With this idea of being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes so closely and so personally in a character. As a white person, I can imagine that it would be very difficult to get into this genre if I felt like none of the characters understood where I was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And just to feel like there wasn't something there for me.
Right.
So I think that makes a very good point.
Yeah, and I'm happy to see that this is something that Romance Writers of America is strongly promoting at this point, is celebrating more diverse voices. And also, but it's important to be aware of whose story you're telling. If, for me, I should not be writing, for example, a Black character if the book is about my experience as a Black person. That's not my story to tell. But to include Black characters is so important, or characters of other religions, or characters, LGBTQ community. It's very important to do that. But sometimes it gets a little tricky, because there are times where I would really like to write a more diverse main character, but I want to be super respectful and careful about it. And the way I feel, which I might be totally wrong, is that if the story, for example, I have a book that I'm working on, mapping out, and the character is Mexican American, but the story is not about her experience being a Mexican American person. It's about being the victim of a date rape and how she recovered from it. So with that, I think it's you can do it, but you have to be very careful about how you're doing that. Another thing that I've seen in romance, which I'm so happy about, is people who have different kinds of disabilities. For example, autistic main characters. The Rosie Project was an excellent book, and The Kiss Quotient as well. I happened to read those back to back without even realizing that they had a similarity. But I was so happy to see that we're expanding our view of who the heroine of a romance novel should be, and not making it, like Stephanie said, into this cookie cutter sort of image.
Definitely. And you both, I think, I mean, we know you personally and we love you. But for my part, I think you both do so much to be mindful allies and to recognize when something is or is not your story to tell. And I think that is powerful on all sides. So I'm really glad that you bring that up, the need for diverse voices and own voices stories, making sure that they're coming from places of experience. I think that's a very good point as well.
And to buy those books. Because if you buy books by diverse writers,
Yes,
publishers will start buying more books by diverse writers. If people
absolutely.
are only buying romances that fit a certain sort of mindset, then that's what publishers are going to buy. So I think it's up to everybody who reads it to just give it a shot. I read my first male romance. It was called Red, White, and Royal Blue, and it was fantastic. I can't remember the author's name. Did you read that, Stephanie?
I haven't read it, so it's on my TBR, and then there's one more, and now I can't remember it. But yeah, it's on my TBR to read. But
Well,
I have read them before.
well, the premise is look at her. I've read them before. The premise is what?
Ah, they're cool.
Yeah, what if the Prince of England fell in love with the son of the President of the United States?
Ooh,
Oh,
that's very exciting.
Yeah. So I read that book on purpose. I said, okay, I'm going to tick off my boxes. I'm going to read one book that has characters who are gay, characters are. I ended up falling in love with each of these books that I read, and I'm so glad I did that. Like, I did it as a conscious thing, but I'm really glad that I did, because it led me to totally different books that I never would have experienced otherwise.
Another
yeah,
great
and I
point.
mean, it's other things when you start to pick them up. I mean, it really changes your perspective. I've been trying to read a lot more neurodiverse books because I've had a YA project cooking for a while. I'm diagnosed with ADHD, and so I am writing a young adult book with characters who also have ADHD, and so I've been reading a lot of those different. Although I will share my little. Can I share a little rejection story? So I had a rejection from an agent who says, "This is fabulous, but right now people are looking for happy ever afters." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like normally I write like these books that are very happy most of the time, and this had a little tension." They're like, "Oh no, it needs to be happier." So there was my neurodiverse effort rejected for not being happy. But there aren't.
Never listen, Stephanie. Never listen.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm not. But but it's interesting because there aren't a lot of books with characters, particularly in romance, that you're seeing where they have ADHD. So for me, that's going to be, I think, a journey down the future. I think I have to explore a character with my similar mindset. So who knows what could happen in that book, because that could be all kinds of wild.
It's opening all kinds of different doors are being opened right now. My old agent said the same thing to me. Like, I wanted to write about a person who had a learning disability, and she said, "No, you can't sell that." And I was like, "What?" This was
No.
this was only like 2013 or something, like 10 years ago almost. It's completely changed at this point. It's the
Yeah.
whole romance world has done a huge flip, and we are a much more, I think we have some more interesting books coming out
Mhm.
because of it, better books because of it, frankly speaking.
Yeah, I'd agree.
We had talked a little bit earlier how this was a reunion for the four of us, since we're all Pen Writers members. And I distinctly remember meeting both of you at different Pen Writers events and how important you've been in my writing journey, and as just being so supportive of where I am, and the laughter and friendship that I've had every time I've been able to see you in person at the conferences. So would you mind telling us a little bit about how Pen Writers has been part of your writing journey?
I can go if Stephanie's thinking.
I
Pen
am.
Pen Writers had a huge influence on me. It was the very first conference I ever went to. I think 2013 was the first one. And immediately I was taken under the wing of so many people who were just wonderful people. And I felt very much like Stephanie said, I could ask them anything. I wasn't bothering them with my questions, and I was really, really green at that point. But it helped me grow as a writer, and it helped me have the confidence a few years later to actually decide to break up with my agent. I broke up with her like as I was at the Pen Writers Conference because I realized like I needed to, it was time to move on. She tried very hard. She did a good job. It wasn't anything, we didn't hate each other. We're still Facebook friends. But I knew I needed to move on, and that gave me the courage to do it. So it's had a profound effect on me. And I find that every time I go, I do learn something different when I go to a conference. And also you get to see all these nice people that you're friends with. So that's the big
Mhm.
draw, isn't it?
It's wonderful when you get to go. I was contemplating because I was trying to remember the first year I went, and I think that was 2016 was
Mhm.
when I had gone, and I had already been published when I went, so I wasn't super green. But I was at a point where it was an extremely low point, and I didn't tell anybody, but I was contemplating quitting
Mm.
and kind of throwing everything in. And so I have always been a big believer in that one moment can change a life. And so you always have to be careful about how you treat people and what you say, because one thing that you say to them could completely ruin or make their day, year, life. You never know. And so I went into Rock and Roll Larry's presentation,
I was with him all
and
week last week for
that would have been awesome. I wanna go on one of those retreats so bad. My children need to grow up a little bit so that I don't feel bad leaving them for the week.
yeah.
But yeah, so I went into his presentation and we did the whole I am a writer thing, and he's playing Good Morning Starshine and all this stuff. And it didn't seem like a lot at the time. But when I left, I decided that I was going to do, I think it was like 5 things from the I was going to give myself 5 to-dos. And I found that what I was doing was, putting a lot of the to-dos down were from his session. So I was playing upbeat music when I got up. I was meditating. I was doing the do's meditation. I was, just telling myself I am a writer. Um, and I now have just kind of a wall sign in my office space, which is not here. This is kind of my daytime space, but no one will bother me here. So this is why I'm here. But it says I am a writer. So it's a reminder. So, I mean, in terms of what pen writers did for me, I'm still writing because of pen writers. So maybe somebody else would have been my one person or my one point of contact, or the person to stop me from saying, okay, well, maybe I should hang this up. But for whatever reason, Larry was that person. And then, of course, every single person there was welcoming. I mean, Abigail was then the next person I saw. And as usual, she's
Way
meet
back.
all these people. We do go way back. And she'd be like, meet all these people. This is Stephanie, and everyone was welcoming. And it was just the motivation that I needed to come back. And actually, I think I wrote Pippa after I came back from the first pen writer session. So it was, yeah. So it's the reason I'm writing.
My first,
When we unmute at the same time, what are we gonna do?
Awkward.
Really surprised. No. My very first pen writers conference, I remember I was coming in from out of state. It, for trying to realize that it was okay for me to tell people and owning that I am a writer moment, and walking into lunch and just feeling like that high school, middle school feeling of holding your like tray. It was a little box lunch and thinking like, I don't know anyone where, I wanted to run back out to my car, and Abigail invited me to come sit at her table. And I
You're
don't even
so
know if you remember that, but you were my person and you were so welcoming at that lunch that I immediately felt like I belonged and I had kind of found my support system. So thank you for that, for sure.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad I didn't say, go find another place.
No, at least she didn't do that. You can't sit here.
Yeah.
Remember that? Remember those
Deserved.
girls? You can't sit here, girls.
Oh,
I bet they're all really badly dressed now.
I was going to say almost a carbon copy of the same thing. It was not at PennWriters because that 2016 PennWriters stuff I could not attend because I was extremely pregnant with my second son.
Yes.
So I sadly missed PennWriters that year, and I remember thinking, oh, like when I figured out the due date, I thought, oh, no PennWriters this year.
Planned it so poorly.
But my second child, as Steph knows, was an extremely loud baby, and was maybe not the best writing partner at home for me. And Steph met me for coffee, which is now right in my neighborhood, that Coffee Tree Roasters, and was like, "How are you doing? Hey, and this was, I think, like 3 months. He was like 3 months old, and I was like, I don't know how I am." And she said, "I've got this writers group, and a spot just opened up. Would you like to come check it out?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great. But human adults, yeah." And that made such a difference for me. And ever since, I have thought of Steph not as my fairy godmother because we are like the same age, but like my fairy god sister
Thank you.
of writing.
Great answer.
So both of you clearly, and Rhonda and I both feel it personally. You make such a great point for the value of that writing community because you're living examples of it. Just how much we need each other.
And that's why, one thing that I've noticed with PennWriters and also with Mindful Writers, which is the group I just retreated with for the week, very safely, I'll have you know, we were all masked and our tables were 10 feet apart when we ate. Like, so safe. But and then I come
Did you have a moment where you're like, pass the ketchup?
I was calling them Grace or Grace because in the Bridgertons, they sit at that long table and she's like,
yes.
You're great. So I was doing that a lot. But there have been other groups that I've been involved in. I won't mention names, but in those groups, they didn't celebrate your success as much as sort of give you a funny look when you succeeded at something. There was a lot more jealousy and there was a lot more competitive kind of stuff going on, which is why PennWriters was very refreshing for me because people are from all different genres. So like it's apples and oranges. You're not competing directly with anybody. And even if you are in the same genre, it's not that kind of vibe. And Mindful Writers, they make a point during the retreat, you aren't allowed to talk about anything involving business. Nothing about the business side of writing, only about the craft, the creativity side. If you're stuck on a plot point or something, sure, but you can't talk about your agent, you can't talk about marketing, you can't, none of that. And because all it takes, like you said, is one thing that somebody says, and all of a sudden your mind is like thinking about that and you get out of your writing zone. So I think it's an important part of that whole group. And I'm very glad about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. I mean, the group has been kind. Everybody has been supportive. Every time you get together, it's, again, it's that reunion feeling. I don't think I I had never met any of Joy's friends from Buffalo. And then I met them and then instantly was brought into this group of wild women who were so much fun. And I mean, it's just amazing the types of connections you can make and how inspirational it can be.
Mhm. Yep.
So yay, pen writers. We all need like little pom-poms or something.
We do. Or like a scroll across the bottom of the screen with random information.
We need a fight song. Well, maybe not a fight song, a right song.
Oh,
It was a little too punny.
I mean, if we can't make puns, what kind of writers are we? Yeah. So speaking of what kind of writers are we, let's talk about talk about the business side of things, the things you wouldn't get into at a Mindful Writers retreat, but about your experiences working with different presses, experiences with self-publishing. Just tell us what it has looked like for you in that kind of cornucopia of experiences in modern publishing.
That's a very good way to describe it. My first book actually was, I had my publisher thanks to Stephanie Keys. I feel like I should look down like we're the Brady Bunch or something. Like you're below me on my screen. So
yeah, you're below me too. I'll turn my head.
She told me about her publisher, and I just broken up with my agent, and I thought this is kind of the right fit for that publisher. After talking to Stephanie, I decided to submit, and that book came out. That was my first one in 2016. And then I sold a few more to small presses and mid-sized presses. And then I've done some self-publishing as well. And I've done some traditional too. One of my books was with Amazon's publishing company. So I think I've seen a little bit of everything. Oh, look, it's Josh. Hi, Josh.
Yes, I have an unpaid intern over here hanging out.
It depends on what your goals are, what your time frame is. Traditional takes a much longer time, and there are no guarantees. I'm working with a great agent now that I met because of Pen Writers. Joy knows who she is. But it depends on the book, and it depends on what you want to do with it. I tend to self-publish the books that I feel are a little maybe quirkier, or that I'm not that I plan to write a series, so I might as well just do it myself. The small press, there are good things about it if you're just starting out, which is when Stephanie and I both used a small press, because they kind of take your hand very gently, and they pay for your cover and your editing, and they format for you, and they put your book up for sale, and then they take most of the money from your from your book. You don't make very much with a small press. You make a lot more self-publishing, and of course traditional publishing, you have the possibility to make more, especially if you're with Amazon, because they promo their own books very heavily. But it depends on where you are on your journey, what the book is, and what your goals are. I had a dear friend, another pen writer, who was very ill, and she was planning to do traditional publishing. And then she said to me, like, I don't think I'm going to have time to do traditional publishing. And so I told her, well, just to find an agent is going to take a long time. To get it to sell it to a publisher is going to take a long time. By the time the whole thing's done, you're talking about 2 or 3 years. She didn't have that much time left. So I helped her to self-publish her book, so she was able to see it and have it in her hands, and everybody was able to read it. So it was great. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with self-publishing a book. The main thing you have to be concerned about is, do you have a good editor? You need to have the best editor that you can afford, without breaking the bank. And then you also need to have proofreaders, and you need to have a professional cover. There are people who try to do it and say, I'm really good at proofreading, and they try to do it themselves. And don't do that. Everything that I made on my first book, I invested in my second book. Everything I made on my second book, I invested in my third book. And then by the time I was self-publishing, I had enough amassed that I could pay for an editor. And that's really what I would recommend if you decide to do self-publishing. What about you, Miss Stephanie?
Well, I started out actually being self-published with my very first book for approximately 3 months, during which time so I should back up. Here's the problem. I work in the corporate environment. So when I came into writing, I thought, oh, I'm just going to query, and these people, of course, are going to reply in a reasonable time window because I have an agenda, right? So that was me when I first came into writing. And I submitted these 5 queries, and everyone rejected it because it was terrible. It was crap. No one, I didn't know what I was doing. It was crap. And so it got rejected, as it should have gotten rejected. And I was like, yeah, that's just not acceptable. So I self-published it. And it was self-published for 3 months, during which time I felt very lonely because I had nobody. I don't know if I was high maintenance at the time or what. I'm like, oh, well, no one cares if I put this out or not. Or now, surprisingly, it actually was doing all right for being self-published, but I was just kind of not knowing what was going on. It was bouncing around. And so what was that, Wendy?
In your first book too. Self-publishing a
Yeah.
first book is very different than self-publishing your 15th book.
It is. And I, did not necessarily know as much as I could have, even though, again, I had researched the heck out of it. So I ended up going with a small press. And so when you mentioned our publisher, so that book ended up being traditionally published, and as did the following 6 titles in that series, that they ended up having me write in an obscene timetable. I mean, like writing a 415-page book in 6 weeks, I will never do again, for anybody. I don't care who the heck you are. But the stuff that I did, I still don't know how I did that. I think it's just amazing, but there it was. But I ended up being then published with them. I still have a title with that publisher as well, but was with them all the way up until 2018. And I had been asked to write. Let me think about this. So you remember the anthologies that Inkspell used to ask for, Wendy? So they would ask for these anthologies. And one of the anthologies that they had asked for was like an enemies to lovers thing. And so I started writing something for that. And then I stopped because I'm like, yeah, this is too good for them. They can't have this. So I thought I'm going to write something else.
Good for you.
I put that over there. But then that ended up being, later would have been my first self-published project. And so since then, what's been kind of interesting is I've actually pulled back with Abigail's encouragement. I've taken back almost all of my rights from that publisher and have been slowly re-releasing and editing again and really expanding all of the original stories. And so I have the expanded edition of The Star Child came out in October. And then I have another book, the expanded edition of The Fallen Stars comes out this April. So I'm slowly re-releasing all of those types of things. So I went from, kind of being self-published and then moving into that traditional realm, and now I'm back to being self-published. But one thing I always tell people, I've taught a lot of classes on self-publishing too. And I always say, look, you need to decide if you want to run a business or if you want somebody to essentially publish your books for you. Because if you are a self-publisher, you're in business for yourself. Your books are your business. So that means you are responsible for treating that like a business. There are legal ramifications, there are tax documents. You've got to be responsible for everything from hiring a great cover designer to a fabulous editor and putting it out, because a good self-published book should be completely indistinguishable from any book that Penguin Random House is putting out, like, from any one of those large publishers. Your book should be able to stand on its own on a shelf next to even the best books. You shouldn't be able to tell the difference, especially when it comes to the writing. So you have to go into it knowing what you're getting into and invest that time.
Are you two able to give us a sneak peek of what you're working on now?
Yes, I can. I wrote, speaking of anthologies, the Mindful Writers Retreat they do a series of anthologies and they donate the money to charity. And right now they have one that just came out for Valentine's Day, but the time before that last year, it was a Christmas anthology. And I was struggling trying to figure out what to write for this thing. And I was, getting pressured by the deadline, and I hadn't written anything yet. And I don't usually write short stuff. Like, I tend to write too long. So I thought, well, it's only 3,000 words. I can do this. But I couldn't decide what to do. And then the day before it was due, all of a sudden I heard this character's voice in my head, and I just wrote it that day and submitted it. You're gonna hate it, but it's called Tink, and it's about a very snarky Christmas elf, but it's not a children's book. It's sort of like Janet Ivanovich if she was writing Stephanie Plum as a Christmas elf. I don't know why I do these things, but it's just so much fun to write, and it's so different from what I usually do. So I worked on that at the retreat, and I am having a blast with this character. And I don't know, right now my agent has 3 manuscripts that are on sub. Poor thing. I mean, I feel so bad for Lauren. And she has no idea that I'm sending her elf porn, but no, it's not really elf porn. I swear it's not. But
You could also like subtitle it Life on the Naughty List.
oh
That is awesome.
no, there's no content in this book, but there is a little bit of romance. But there is such a thing as that. I don't know if you guys know that.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. What was I reading? I can't remember what the search term was, but it's like one of those deals where you're on your Kindle and then you see something and you start searching, and it was something like paranormal midlife crisis romance or something. And it's like all these women who are like having hot flashes while they kill ant monsters and things like this. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what is this?
One of the first people that I followed on Twitter was this. I don't know how I ended up following this person. I was very new to Twitter. Her name is Hot Rodika, but she's hilarious, and her titles are all like so funny. You can edit this out if it's too bad, but like I banged Bigfoot, and like the best one was my lactation consultant was a lesbian werewolf. Tell me that's not.
I mean, yeah, that really hooks you right there.
Yes.
That sounds painful.
Yes.
I
read the beginning of the book. It wasn't half bad. I mean, they give you those free things, and I was like, this is actually pretty good. She's having a good time with it. You can tell from all of her titles, and she's just having fun. I don't know if she's still doing it. I haven't kept up with Hot Rocks.
Gosh. That's awesome.
I'm not writing anything like that. Just to be clear. No lactation consultants in any of my books.
I don't know. I think there might be an opportunity there. I'm just saying. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I like just working through re-releasing all the Star Child books. A couple other things that I have in the hopper is I'm writing the 3rd book in the Summer Abroad series, which is The Apprenticeship of Quinn Cassidy. So just started working on that particular book. I'm very much in love with it already. It's about a young woman who is getting ready to start an apprenticeship in Nashville. She's a singer-songwriter. She writes country music, which don't ask me why she does that, because I hate country music and I've had to research it. And now that's all that's coming up on my Spotify playlist. Just saying. Okay. So anyone who might read that book later, you need to appreciate what I'm going through for you, right? But anyway, Quinn is heavier, and she loses a lot of opportunities because they tell her she's not the right fit. I myself went down 4 sizes in the past few years, and you know, there's a whole different feeling and mindset when you feel like you don't fit in because of how you look. And so Quinn's model, a mother, is a supermodel and does a lot of fat shaming of her, or size shaming, if you will, of her daughter on social media. So it's just really getting into this character's shoes, where she's not only, you know, having to go and take a musical journey, but exploring her own self-discovery of realizing that she can't let other people put her down, that she has to embrace who she is, no matter what her size is beautiful. And also she gets to go to London and meet up with some of the characters from Caden Hannigan's band. So a lot of really cute British and Irish guys. And so that's a lot of fun too. So I get to pair her up with fiddle player Jamie King. So that's one of the projects that is coming up. So I'm having a lot of fun working on that. So hopping back and forth again between fantasy and romance, because I cannot pick a genre to write in. And every day I go downstairs and I say to my husband, that's it, I'm just gonna write romance now. And then I'll be like, but what if there's this girl and she dies every day? What would happen? And he's like, what happened to the romance? And I'm like, oh yeah.
Christmas elf.
Exactly. It's like we just can't stop hopping back and forth between those 2 genres. But yeah, so that's kind of coming down the pike. And also because a certain person removed their story from an anthology I was in, I now, thank you, get the rights back to this lovely novella I wrote called His Royal Typeface. Thank you so much, Abigail. But
Well,
now I get to
you
relive.
get the rights back, it's 3 years, so.
I know, right? I was super happy. I'm just kidding you. But I was super happy because I love that story. So now I'm going to re-release that. So Nashla is doing a new cover for that right now as we speak. So I'm super excited to
Good.
be able to put that one out, because that was a really fun story. It's nice to write royals. So
Yeah. The novella
yes,
that I wrote in
yes.
that anthology, I made it into a novel, and it's with my agent now.
Did you? Oh, that's excellent.
So
I had
that's
thought
the
about
only
doing that.
anthology.
That is awesome. No, I had thought about adding more to their story. It's about a pauper prince who has to design fonts in order to save his castle. But I need to go to new stories and not like, I need to be done with stories I've already been to. I'm ready to move past the deja vu. So after some of these other ones come out, it's just new stuff. But perfect for pandemic time though.
Well, how has the pandemic kind of changed or not changed the way that you write? You know, has it made an impact? I mean, obviously it's had an impact on us socially. It's had an impact on any events or releases. What looks different for you now?
I was made for stuff. I mean, you tell me to stay home and just write all day. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have no social obligations, you know, can't do that. Pandemic. Sorry.
I remember your advice from your keynote at Penn Writers. It was the best keynote, taking it through the eyes of your dog, Al Capone.
Oh, yes.
You said the most important advice for writers is the same as commands for dogs: sit and stay.
Yes.
And it's true for the pandemic now, sure.
Yes. Yeah. Well, my husband and I are fortunate because our kids have flown the nest. They're all in college or older. And my husband works from home. He works for a cybersecurity company. So we I mean, it changed our lives, of course, but we were really lucky because we didn't have to deal with what a lot of people had to deal with. But my kids are kind of like, you're going to be like one of those people who never leaves their house. I'm like, yeah, you have a problem with that? I don't have a problem. Yeah, I embraced it too much.
Yeah. You know what? I would say the same thing. I like it a little bit too much because I struggled. Well, here's the thing. So this happened, and all I could think is, oh, now I don't have to drive, 50 minutes to Oakland to go to work. So I'm like, oh, great. Well, what should I do with that? Oh, I should get up at 5 a.m. and write. So I just started going to work. Like I went to work the next day and everybody's like, well, how are you doing this? We're feeling bad. And I'm like, look, better living through denial. If I have something that, just it's how I started. I started writing through bad times that I didn't know how to deal with, and I'm doing it now. And I just latched on to here's an alternative world that I can jump into to be able to deal with all the crap that's going on out there. So I have just kept at it because that's my coping mechanism. I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but I need to escape into writing just the way I escaped into those Harlequin romances as a kid. I mean, you just need to get out of the real world. And I mean, I would say the same thing. I mean, I had maybe like 2 weeks, Abigail, where I struggled, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to deal. And then those passed, and then I'm like, oh, well, I don't have to meet anybody's expectations. I don't have to go anywhere I don't want to go. I don't have to go and sit in a school presentation in the audience and listen to someone show me a bad PowerPoint for an hour and 45 minutes. I don't have to go to the school band concert. I can just be here all the time and eat Pop-Tarts. Now, incidentally, my cholesterol has gone up, which is unfortunate. But I have had a lot of baked goods. I gained weight. I lost weight. Like, it's been crazy, but it's been good for me, mostly because I haven't had that commute time that I would normally have going into Pittsburgh. So I mean, I've used that tremendously for my, just for my writing time and just everything. Took a class, and it's just been really good to not have that. I mean, now admittedly, again, we're lucky as Abigail is. My husband and I are both working from home. And we did not send our kids to school, so they're both here because we're all asthmatics, all four of us, not interested in COVID. So we're just all staying here. So all of us are here all the time. So it can get a little dicey, but we have a lot of puzzles.
I think it's an escape. I think some people were really struggling with being able to write. I know that some of my friends were really having trouble with it, but for me, it was just kind of something I could control. It was something
Yes.
I could make into whatever I wanted it to be. And so, I mean, we all had dark days during this year, but I think if I didn't have the writing, if I didn't have that to do, I don't know what I would have done with myself. I mean, I think we all need to have that creative outlet, whether you're a writer or an artist or have some kind of hobby of some kind. And if you don't have that, you just go a little nuts. I have neighbors who are
Yeah.
living proof. Take out that part. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it is true though. I mean, it's having that outlet for it. I will say that one thing that's really interesting that came out of this that has been fabulous is that I have more work-life balance than I ever have before, which you probably wouldn't expect because what else is there to do? But I sat down and I made a schedule and said, this is when I'm going to start writing and this is when I'm going to stop. And when I'm done, I'm done. Because, when you're a writer, it's like having homework all the time. So I had to put an end to that. And that has been really good. Like my kids know now when mom says she's done now, and she can go in the snow or whatever. They can burn some cookies or whatever the kids may be.
Work for me too. Like some people do it by word count. Some
Mhm.
people do it by time. My daily goal is to write a scene. So I'll think in the morning, usually when I'm taking a walk with the dog, or maybe not when it's just cold outside. But I figure out what I'm going to write that day. And once I've written that in the morning, then if I write anything beyond that, it's gravy. And then I try purposely to not write in the evenings. In the afternoon, I try to do marketing, email, business kind of stuff. But in the evenings, I try to set aside time to just relax, watch a movie, read a book. Um, always leave time to read at the end of every day or whenever you can fit it in, because it's so important to your writing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think my goals change depending on the project. So right now I'm kind of editing a project and also writing a project. So the goals might be for the drafting, it certainly will be word count.
Mhm.
And I set up, the word count per day. And then the editing I'll tend to do in the morning, and I'll just say, okay, maybe I'll hit, you know, 3 pages or 5 pages or whatever per day. But usually the drafting is through dictation, and that's in the afternoon.
Oh.
So when I get done with work, I have like a little recorder with the microphone, and
Mhm.
I'll walk around and I'll take 25 minutes to talk about anyone who pissed me off that day. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'll take 25 minutes just to walk around and just say, oh, what if I do this? And just, it's always garbage at the beginning of the dictation, but then I'll get into maybe dictating a chapter. And then I'll try to hit a word count in whatever it is. I always try to get 1,500 words a day. Can't always do it, but it's way easier to do it through dictation, especially if you talk like me. So I get through it that way, and it just kind of, it's a decompression, just moving into the evening and getting away from work and reminding me, what is a little more important, which is the writing and of course the family. So it kind of works out well.
I use my phone too when I'm walking to, like, if I think of what I want to put in the next scene. It's part of the whole mindful writers
Mhm,
thing, is mindful walking. But then I get home,
mhm.
I did voice text without my glasses on. I have no idea what I write sometimes, but
I used to have the best time. I might have told you this story actually. When I would be dictating, like in the summer, I used to walk around in my backyard, and like my neighbor, like I was dictating romance, right? Well, I didn't realize that my neighbor was like timing her gardening with my dictation. And it's because she wanted to know what happened next, but also I didn't realize that she was listening to me dictate the sex scenes into the I'm walking around like, half-heartedly trying to pick out weeds, and then I give up on it and just walk around in circles, and I'm saying all this stuff, and here the neighbors just over there on the other side of the hedge listening to the whole
thank God
thing.
you were a writer. Otherwise, she'd think, what's this person doing?
I
Talking to
know, she's
herself.
killing, talking to herself, killing plants. Oh, fun times.
Speaking about your process that you each have, which is so fascinating, would you describe yourself as a pantser or a plotter?
Good
Is
question.
that a serious question? Because well, no, I should say, like, I've tried to be a pantser. I have tried. It didn't work. What would happen is I'd start off great. I'd just be writing the most glorious crap down. It was golden. It was awesome. And then I'd get to the middle of the book and have a panic attack. And the critique group that Joy is talking about, like I would go into that group and I would be like, oh my God, I don't know where I'm going with this. My life is over. This book sucks. I'm going to put it on the shelf. And so
They're
I would
usually
come
a lot
home and
calmer in the critique group, but
I, Was I? I was not. I was screaming on the inside. But I would come home and I would tell my husband, and then he would go, "You didn't outline. That's why it's not working. Get the index cards." So anytime I would sit down and outline it, it would just help tremendously. Now I have, I don't even try to pants it. I have a really involved outline. I go through a whole, it's kind of like a hybrid of Suzanne Johnson's Patchworking the Perfect Plot, and take on it, and combined with a little Save the Cat and, my own stuff. And it's a little hybrid plan that I work through so that when I'm done, I have like a 35 to 40 page master plot of everything that is going to happen. Now, that said, I can get through there, and then I'd have some character that says, "I'm not doing that," and won't agree. Like, you give a character one name and then they decide they want to be called something entirely different. And so that's a little bit of an inconvenience, but you kind of just got to go with it. I mean, they have to have a little flexibility to change if it's not working, or alternatively, if, there's another voice that needs to be heard, because that does happen. So a lot of times I'll start off with one really nice, color-coded, beautiful, perfect master plot. And by the time the book is done, it's like got little stickies all over it, and, notes and highlighter things. And I've added people and cut people, and it doesn't look as pretty as it did when I started. And then I should go back and edit that master plot, so I remember that I changed those people, but I never do that. I'm not that kind to myself. So so it's always a surprise.
This is living proof that every writer needs to do things their own way. There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Not at all.
I was a total pantser for most of my books. There are a few that I ended up doing sort of a combo pantsing plotting thing. This last book, I think it's because it was originally a short story, so I sort of had a template, I guess, for it. I'm actually plotting this book, and it was really tough for me. But I think what happens is if you're a plotter, you spend a lot more time up front before you start writing, getting things organized and thinking through different things. If you're a pantser, you spend the time at the end fixing all those things that you didn't plot. So I think it just depends on what works for your personality. Stephen King, in his book On Writing, which I'm sure everybody's read, by the way, if you don't have the audiobook, he narrates it, which is pretty cool. But he said that what he does is he starts with a premise, and then he keeps thinking about it until he hears the characters' voices in his head, and then he just writes. He's not a plotter at all. That being said, I mean, he's brilliant, but people sometimes say that his endings are his biggest weakness, which I think if you're not a plotter, that's where, you're kind of like, oh, and this happened and it's over. So I think that's kind of the sign. I think you should try both options. And I'm using kind of a bunch of different things, like Stephanie said too. There is one specifically for plotting romance. It's called Romancing the Beat. It's sort of based on Save the Cat, but it's for romance. And that one's helpful if you're interested in plotting romance. And I've started using Scrivener, which I hated Scrivener like for so long. And I don't use it to write because I just can't. I just use Word. But I'm using it to do sort of like character stuff and to plot out each chapter. So I can have the note cards like Stephanie said, but they're just on the computer and I can switch things around. So that's kind of a new thing with this book too. So it's always evolving. It's always changing. This is, I think this is my 16th book that I'm writing right now. And every time, I mean, I'm still learning something different and I'm still doing different things. I think Neil Gaiman, in the beginning of his book, I think it was American Gods, there's a little prologue and he talks about how he told his friend, I finally figured it out. I finally figured out how to write books. And his friend just laughed and he said, "You figured out how to write this book. The next one's you're gonna have to learn something new for the next one." And that's absolutely true. Each book is a completely different journey. One will be easy, you just pants your way right through it and it's done. The other one you have to work and plot and it's much harder to get it out, but just got to find the way to do it.
Yeah, and the way that works for you, no matter what that is, it's not going to be the same as
Right.
the person next to you. And there's not really any right or wrong as long as it works for you.
Right. And always listen to other people too, because Kathy Shoup just sent me a book today. It's called Take Your Pants Off. I just got it today. She mailed it to me. So I'm going to read that, but I've heard it's a very simple way to become a plotter if you're a pantser. Take your pants off. Has underwear on the
That's
front.
interesting. Yeah, you know what I should say too, like if there's any pantsers who are considering plotting and they don't know if they can, I should add that like because of my ADHD, I get very overwhelmed with a lot of structure and a lot of organization at times. And but I also have problems with remembering what I've written. And so I would often rewrite entire chapters and not remember having written them the first time. And, you know, because I wasn't organized. So this is more out of necessity for me.
Mhm.
But what I found is that with my homegrown plan, I break up the 3-act structure into 6 acts that are like that I give funny names to. Like this is the shit or get off the pot act, or this is like I give them my this is the I thought I had everything together, but I'm still screwed act. Like I give them funny names
Oh,
to make me you know, entertained and interested and not, you know, so I just break a lot of things up to make it achievable. So even if you are, you know, even though I don't feel like I can effectively be a pantser, even if you are, you can explore ways to do things like that too. Just make them your own, whatever that is.
and by the way, Derek, there's a guy named Derek Murphy. I'm not sure if you've ever encountered him. He has videos on YouTube, but he has a plot structure for each chapter. Like he gives it each one a name. And I was kind of looking for that for this book, and I've been using his structure. And I think it really it could really work, especially not necessarily for romance. It depends on what you're writing, but I think it's very helpful, and especially if you have something going on with your book that just doesn't feel right. Like if you're a pantser and you know there's something wrong, but you can't quite identify it, try looking at one of these plotting books and see if perhaps there's something that you've missed. Um, and I think that that's, you know, it'll help you get through that.
Yeah, Save the Cat Writes a Novel is especially fabulous.
Oh, I love that. I use that a lot. And Pen Writers did a
Mhm.
Save the Cat intensive, and I hope they do it
Mhm.
again. I would take it again just because it was so great.
Awesome. Thank you for all the recommendations as well. It's clear that you both
Their
know your
heads like
craft so well. Well, no, it's great. It's you're able to tie in so much that other writers can draw from, and I think that again points to the value of this community and how much we can share with one another. So thank you both. Um, I think we are about out of questions, and I'd just like to ask if either of you have anything that you are looking forward to, anything that you'd like to share that you're hopeful for in this new year, professionally or personally, since we're still at the beginning, relatively speaking, of a new, hopefully brighter year.
yeah, January was very long, a very long month.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
very.
there is so much to look forward to this year. Like I said, I have 3 manuscripts with my agent right now. So since I've never been an athletic person, this could be my only chance to ever have a hat trick. I don't think it's actually going to happen, but you never know. I can score a hat trick in 2021.
I'm just excited because I know what that means because I wrote a character who played hockey. And if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't know. So I feel awesome right now. Just
It's
you
only
please
hockey.
continue.
It's only hockey. It's not that I did basketball. I thought it was
I
basketball.
don't know.
No, it's
I
hockey.
think it's hockey.
It's hockey. You're right.
I don't know.
I think it was originally hockey, but it could be both. Just write it into a novel, make it
You're
sound like it's
you're
real.
being nice to me. I think we have to all step back a second and say, I think the important lesson that we learned in 2020 is there is no later. You need to stop telling yourself, I'll get to this later. I'll write this later. I'll do this later. I'll take that trip later. Because later is not guaranteed. And if we didn't, I mean, we all knew that, but I think 2020 really, really made us aware of it. So if you're right now pushing off and saying, yeah, I'll write that book later. I'll write the book when my kids are older. I'll write the book when I have more time and that kind of thing. Just do it now because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And it also makes me appreciate so much more the things. It puts in perspective what's really important to you. It gets rid of all the nonsense stuff that we used to think was so important, and makes you like. I made a bucket list, and I'm like not holding back at all. I'm like before I was like, well, maybe we can go here, go here. I'm like, no, we are going there, and we're going here, and it just the whole idea that you know you might not have that opportunity later. And I think many of us have lost friends and family members over this year, be it from the virus or from another disease. But the sad thing as well is that even like when somebody was sick or somebody was ill or somebody passed away, you weren't able to see them. You weren't able to see them when they were sick. You couldn't go to the funeral. So it made you realize, like, especially your for women, I'm going to say your female friendships are so important. And you need to really take the time. You might feel guilty, like, oh, I should be spending this time with my kids, but you need to take that time for yourself and your friends too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny how, to echo what Abigail said, where you go to a lot of these events and you'll meet somebody who says they're an aspiring writer and they have a book that they want to write someday, but they haven't quite started it yet. So here's my like pep talk or non-pep talk. You're either a writer or you're not. If you want to make it happen, you find a way. And if that means that you're going to take 10 minutes when you go to the bathroom and multitask and type on your phone, that sounds gross. Maybe that's not the best example. When my kids were little, I used to hide in the bathroom. I would sit on the floor, right? And I would read and write on the floor in the bathroom. And my husband thought I had irritable bowel syndrome for years because I would just go in the bathroom and hide in there. Like, but find the time. It's amazing what you can do with 10 minutes, if 10 minutes is all you have. If it matters to you, if you're passionate about it, if you want to do it, nobody else is going to do this for you. And again, we've learned this year that time isn't guaranteed, that we are going to lose friends, we're going to lose loved ones, things are going to change. You could wake up tomorrow and not be able to move your hands, so you can't type. You never know where that's going to go. So you have to decide, how do you want to live this life? And what do you want to have accomplished? And if you want to write, do it. I mean, you're not going to be any worse off than you are today. In fact, you may be better because you tried, right? I mean, in the words of Yoda, and I'm not going to say it in that voice, I think we all know what he said. I cannot do the Yoda impersonation, but I mean, do or do not, there is no try, right? Make it happen. And that's what I want to see for 2021. I want to see a year filled with people who aren't afraid to take chances. I want to see every single person on this call and give you all big hugs. I want to go to a coffee shop and write again and get harassed by strangers and ask weird questions. I used to hate that and take it for granted. Now I would love to get harassed by a stranger as long as I had a latte. I just want to get out of the house. You know, I want to see all the possibilities, and I want to see all the wonderful things that everybody in this Pen Writers organization is going to write. So that's my hope for
Right.
2021.
For those people who have been working on the same manuscript for the last 20 years, it's done.
It's time.
Send it out. It doesn't, you can look at it again for another 20 years, and you just need to do it now. Just
Yes,
get it out there.
send it out.
I actually know people who have done that.
I do as well. I do as well. Time to.
I mean, where do you end a memoir? I mean, you're still
Well,
living.
it's true. That's a little tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Huh.
All right. Well, I think that was just wonderful advice to end on. So again, thank you both so much, Stephanie Keys, Abigail Drake. Thank you for your time and your warmth and just everything that you've shared today. I think this was just a very special interview.
It was so great seeing you guys too. Thank you for organizing this.
Yeah, it was wonderful getting to see you and catch up. And even though we can't see the faces out there, we're picturing them in our minds.
Yes, thank you both so much. And next time we'll do it in person.
Excellent. That would be wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you so much again on behalf of Pen Writers Presents. I'm Joy Gibbons, and we will see you next month.